Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm here with Rich Flack. How's it going, Rich?
Yeah, so good, Ray, man. So nice to be back with you. As you know, we always have such fun. So yeah,
Oh, we
awesome.
always do. And guys, everybody, we're here to talk portraits. You got the two most non-portrait photographers that are known for everything but portraits here to talk about portraits. A little bit of a
Yeah,
different topic
yeah,
for us, but something that I'm really excited to talk about, man.
yeah, I think so, Ray. I mean, I think it's just so ironic. But funny, I think I looked at your images as like the images that we've actually won acclaim for, won awards. All of mine have been portraits,
It's been,
which is really funny because it's not what I focus on. It's not my favorite
yeah.
genre. Yeah, and I think there's a few things in there. Is like one, yeah, it's just because I focus on somewhere doesn't mean that I don't love taking portraits. I still do. And I love learning how to take better portraits. And I think that's a lot about what tonight is about. And I think, it is ironic. And I think the disclaimer here is that I definitely don't think I'm the right person or the, world what's it
Expert,
judge of
yeah.
what makes a great portrait. But like I think with all our other shows, it's just
Yeah.
really to share our knowledge and if anything, just give people stuff to think about when it comes to like how do you push your portrait along a continuum? If a continuum you started okay and you want to get to great, what are some of the things that you can think about and do to just move your image further along, make it better? And so, yeah, I hope people are going to enjoy it and it gives some food for thought and just some cool things to think about. I love structure, so I love being able to just have tools that can help me push any portrait more towards good or great. And so I hope that is what we achieve tonight.
Yeah, definitely. I have a real funny short story about what you mentioned too, with like we're both sort of well known for smaller in frame, including habitat and stuff like that. And yet, when it comes to competitions, I think it was Bird Photographer of the Year a few years ago. I got second place in the bird portrait category with a common loon like feeding its chicken. It was like just the bill of the adult. Like it didn't even have its head in there. Like it was that
I
close.
love that shot. I
Uh,
remember it well.
yeah, thank you. Well, the funny part is I had gotten a comment back from somebody somewhere down the road from that was like very upset that I love to preach and share about small in frame, and yet I won an award for that. And it's like, well, you're allowed to do both out there. Just because I really have a preference here doesn't mean, and you mentioned it, it's like, it doesn't mean that I'm going to pass up a great opportunity at a beautiful portrait and still try to capture them. Even though my love and passion maybe isn't in that, I still recognize like they can be incredibly powerful photographic tools for a wildlife photographer.
Yeah, I love that, Ray. And I think, yeah, I spend a lot of time thinking about what makes good or great portraits. I just don't spend all of my time in the field concentrating on that.
Yeah.
But, what helps is when you've got like a good idea,
Yeah.
you can then start looking for that and visualize that and see the opportunity. I think that's a lot what I hope the show and I guess what I do, in my own time, just mentoring photographers is really helping them to see opportunities, and where's good to wait and where does that potential portrait actually has the opportunity to move from good to great. Because I think, I don't know about you, but I often think that that allows you to wait in the right places
Yeah.
or go back to a place where that great portrait might happen. So, yeah, awesome. I'm really excited for tonight. And I think also just another disclaimer is as much as we're not the authority on greatness here, it's also we're probably not going to cover all areas. So this is
Sure.
not like a tutorial or teaching about everything you need to know about great portraits. It's just really us like having a cool conversation
Yeah.
about some of the things that are worth noting and that might help others move their images, just along that continuum.
So, Rich, let's start with our definition of what's a good bird portrait. And so, I'll hand it off to you for that. What do you feel like a good bird portrait is for you?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question because like I was really confused and still am a little bit because I don't think there's a definitive answer, like this is what it is. But in my mind, like it is an image that really talks to the personality and character of the bird. And I think, we had a brief chat earlier. You said it's all about the bird, and I think that's it. It's the character, it's the personality, and it's an image that holds you thinking about that and not about other things. And so, yeah, I think it's good to start with a definition because that then, really focuses in on what we're talking about tonight. But yeah, that's probably my best attempt yet at defining it.
For me, for so many years, it was sort of in my mind defined by the size of the bird in the portrait. And that really was a kind of a determining factor for me of like a quote unquote bird portrait or not, as I slowly branched into more environmental and small and frame stuff. But I've come to sort of change and modify that definition over the years, which is something that, like, I'm sure you've realized this. It's constant. It's constantly evolving what our own definition of good and great and bad and does work and doesn't work, and even these definitions of what's a bird portrait versus what is not. And I think the thing for me that the one word that most connects to a bird portrait is the one you said, which is personality. And when we can feel and get some sense of personality out of our subject, that to me it's a portrait at that point, because once it evolves into too small in frame or more environmental, or where the environment almost matters more than the subject, then I feel like, not that there's never personality, but personality is far from like the top or a strong component of those photos.
Yeah, I love that. It's funny, it makes me think about just an example I use, um, if you're going to take a photo, let's say you want to take a photo of my wife, and you want to take a portraiture of her. You really need to know her to capture her
Yeah.
personality,
Yeah.
and you really need to spend time with her to kind of get a sense of who she is. And my wife has this beautiful naughty smile. Like, she's got it in her pictures when she was young. Like, I just see it, but it's carried on into, like, as she's got older, she's still got this very naughty smile. It just captures so much about her personality, who she is, the side of her that not everyone gets to see. And I think that is like part of what we're saying. Like, a portrait does that with a bird. It just shares something about its character, its being, it's who it is with your audience. And yeah, like, it's an interesting point you make, because I don't think necessarily how much of the frame it fills is necessarily a determinant of
Correct.
whether you've been successful in that regard. And so, yeah, I think there's some degree of, like, you're not going to have this tiny bird that you can't see, but I think, like, any photo that does that for me,
Yeah.
that really points to the essence of the character and personality, is a portrait. And yeah, hopefully that gives us a good start for tonight in terms of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and one other thing I'll add before we get into sort of our first detailed looks into these portraits is what you just said. You have to learn about your subject, which means spending time out there, right? Learning about the behavior, the environment, what they like to do, how they like to do it, the time of the day they like to do, and all those things, all that information, all that research, time in the field is what's really going to give you better odds. Not, sometimes we get to walk out and just get lucky and things just line up perfectly, but most of the time that's not the case. And so all of that time in the field, scouting and researching and learning about your subject, is very much going to increase your odds to be able to capture that personality in a better way, and to line up other things, right? And like, that's just how it works with wildlife photography. More time out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was the point I was making with the portrait of Eileen. Like, I've spent so much time with her. I know
Yeah.
where the opportunity is, and I know when I've captured it, I've got it.
Yeah.
And I think if you haven't spent time with your subject, you don't actually know when you've got it. There's half-collared kingfishers that are always around my home, and they have this very unique thing where they point their bill in the air and they pick their little tail up. That's very much who they are. It's a
Yeah.
unique part of their personality. But you wouldn't know if you just first time rock up, see a kingfisher, and that happens to happen. You wouldn't know that you've captured their essence, like who they
Sure.
are. And so you might likely not think how powerful that is. You might not, show it or enter it or put it in your portfolio, because you kind of don't realize how special it is.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what you say is like that time in the field. If you think about portraits, all you've got is like a stick, a bird in the background, right? Largely.
Yep.
So that time to like learn what is the personality, what makes that bird different, becomes really important. And so I think that's a great point to make.
Yeah, and so let's jump right into one of the things that we both find is like sort of I would say at least like a good basis of a good bird portrait, and that is eye contact.
Yeah.
And we got two examples from you here that really illustrate the difference there.
Yeah, I think it's just good to start going like, okay, so how do we get to good? And that's like what we want to do now is just look at some images, say, what are some of the things that, if I'm looking at a bird in the field, what are almost like the essentials, the key things that need to be in place for me to know, I can at least get to good, and good's beyond what everyone else takes, just a little bit further than average. And so, one of the just key things for me is eye contact. And I think, we've spoken about this before. It's just about connection.
Yeah.
And so for me, eye level eye contact is really around like if you've got a portrait, you want to draw your audience in. You want them to connect with your subject, you're talking about its personality, its character. You want to draw them in and get them to be part of that bird's world. And I think, eye contact and catch light and being level with the bird are key things that I want to have just as like the table stakes, right,
Yeah.
to get to good. And so, yeah, this hopefully illustrates it well. I use this, it's a blue swallow. There are only 25 left in our country. It's critically endangered and it's
Wow.
vulnerable in Africa. So it's quite a rare bird. And so, I found when I was starting photography, I get so excited. Here's a rare bird doing the splits,
Yeah.
and like I know that this hadn't been captured before. But if I hadn't learned about the importance, is not getting so absorbed into the bird and the moment
Yep.
and forgetting that I need connection, I need proper eye contact. You would not wait for the head to move towards you. And sometimes you get home and you've got this bird that's just looking slightly away.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I showed this to all my mentorship participants to really illustrate this point. And I'm like, I've never had someone say they prefer the bird on the left, that's looking slightly away because it just doesn't have that connection. It
Correct.
doesn't draw you in. The picture's almost exactly the same,
Yeah.
but the one just is good.
Yeah.
It's better.
Yeah. It is. Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully that just illustrates the first point well.
Well, and I'll go back and forth between these here because I love this example because it's so subtle, right? It's like sometimes photographers, especially beginning photographers, get it when the bird's completely looking away, right? But this one, if we back and forth these, it's like there's a subtle difference there. There's not much. If you saw this one just on its own, you might think, oh, this is pretty good, right? But then you see true eye contact and you're like, oh, wait, there it is. Like that little turn.
Yeah.
And it's not even that. It is fascinating to me how this works, and I still don't know if I could really fully understand or explain why that is the case, but so many birds like this don't have necessarily like a different colored, was it iris versus pupil? And so we can't see like the center of the eye, which way it's actually looking, right? Like this is just a solid black eye, but there's something that when I look at this photo, I can tell like that bird is like truly eye contacting me and connecting, right? Even though I can't see, like it could, maybe the eye's pointed this way. I don't really know, but there's something in there that you can just tell, right? You can almost just feel it.
Yeah, I think part of that might be, I know faces and eyes carry a lot of visual weight. And I guess if that eye is like more pronounced and more obvious and more looking at you, that would draw your attention more,
Yeah.
would draw you in. And so I think it's part of it looking at you, but it's also part of the visual weight that might carry. I mean, that would be my like best guess like answer that question. I don't know if I'm right, but it would be but there's something like it is. I mean, composition, design, like these things are there to help us as photographers tell our story. And there's no doubt, like whether it is the visual weight or that, the sense of it's looking at you, that it just draws you in. It creates more connection with you and the subject. And when it's a portrait, like that's so fundamentally key. And it's funny, like I thought I noticed the nuance of like eye contact and catch lights like pretty well. But given that I'm fascinated with habitat shots, I was reading another photographer's blog and they specialize in owl portraits. And because I don't specialize in owl portraits, I hadn't really thought that much about catch light and because they're looking at you as opposed to most birds you looking sideways. And I'm just normally happy in a habitat shot. If an owl's looking at me and it's framed and there's compositional stuff, like that's a win, right? I'm not really like, can't even see the catch light, But it's amazing to hear this person talk about like how seriously they take it. And they're like, I make sure the sun's directly behind me. I actually want the owl's head just to dip a little bit so that the catch light is perfectly symmetrical between both eyes.
Wow.
And I was like, wow. Like that's a whole nother level of like how seriously you can take this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's funny, like I was like, I actually really loved that I found that out because if there's a time when I have a habitat shot and I can actually have the time to get the sun behind me, I'll do that because that just little incremental improvement will make that person happy, and will just push my image a little bit further along the continuum. So I love that about photography. Like it's just like for me, this process of learning what not just you like, but also
Yeah.
what others like. I think that's like part of it. We love habitat shots, but we've learned to understand what, people like about portraits and what we like about portraits.
And the never ending adding of more decisions to make in the field, which I truly do enjoy. I really do. I love
Yeah,
just
I do.
running through those, sometimes, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, hundreds of micro decisions we make as a photographer in leading up to a photo, that can start to
Yeah,
elevate that, and the more of them we can have conscious in our
100%.
mind, the more we can pay attention to them and improve them as we go. Yeah.
I love that, Ray. It's such an important point because, I mean, you like me, I mentor some guys that I'm like, what in the world am I going to teach this person? Because their
Yeah.
photographs are so good already. And it's really helping those, just getting them conscious about those incremental
Yeah.
improvement, those choices that they make in the field that then allows them to make habit of them.
Yeah.
And then they do it faster, but they're
Yep.
also more confident in why they're doing it, which then elevates their already great photography
Yep.
to way better than I'm ever going to get to. But I love that. And it's exactly what you say.
Yeah. So we got another example here. I got an example of these wood ducks I photographed. Another example of just slightly off eye contact to the left, just kind of looking ahead, and then more direct eye contact. And this is one where we can see that separate, like different color of the pupil versus the rest of the eye, and that helps more with the eye contact. But then this also touches on some other parts of what can make a portrait more engaging and more connecting, and that is, like both examples, the swallows you had and this, both have what would be arguably just the cleanest of backgrounds, right? Just a smooth single color. But we have reflection in this one. And now on the left, we have a rippled reflection that kind of gets, muddled and disappeared there, and is part of this portrait and can be elevated when you get mirrored water, which is somewhat out of your control usually, but if you are lucky enough to be in a place and then recognize it, and can be conscious enough to include it, it can make that difference, because that mirrored reflection just obviously elevates that one.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the eye contact for me is pretty decent on both. Like you can see the subtle improvement in the in the one with the beautiful reflection.
Agreed.
But I think what's so noticeable is just how that reflection elevates. It might be a small thing, and it elevates it because it produces symmetry, and
Yeah.
symmetry is a guide in art, and so people see it's beautiful. And so it's a small difference, but quite a big difference from an appeal and a pleasing perspective. So yeah, I love that. Yeah, just another way to push it a little bit further.
Yeah, definitely. And then you got this one. I love to hear a little bit more of what you like to point out on this one. I love the eye ring on this
Yeah.
bird, by the way.
Yeah. So it's a classes cuckoo. It's a beautiful cuckoo. You don't get to photograph them often. And I think, I really just use this to, I guess, illustrate some very simple. So, when I'm looking to move a portrait to good, just to good, I'm not talking about great at this stage. There's some very simple, besides eye contact, connection, and in your case, the use of reflections, just looking at color.
Mm.
So obviously, like, the basics of it, don't have any distractions in your background because this is all about the bird. The other is, choose a perch that suits the bird. So we've got that in place. But how do you just move your background and the colors in the image just a little bit further from average? And for me, it's like just simple stuff. It's like, can you find a background where the background's not plain green? It's, subtle shades of
Yeah.
the same color, because that in art creates harmony, which is a principle you want to achieve. So shades of the same color is simplicity, which creates a togetherness. And then if you can match your bird's color with the background, you connect your bird to the background, which again creates that unity. And then if you can get some of your bird, just a little bit of your bird, to then contrast with that background, you've got a lot of things suddenly that have come together from an art perspective. And so for me, like that doesn't happen often. So a lot of the time when I'm going like, how do I move north of average? Well, how easy is it to get, bird stick and a plain background? Yeah, a lot easier than getting a bird on a stick with a background that's different shades of the same color that matches your bird and also contrasts against your bird. And so when I've got that, it's not like there's no arrogance in me. I just want to prove myself and build my own confidence. And when I do that, I'm just confident that I moved it
Yeah.
towards good. I don't really care exactly where it sits. It's just better than, my other shots of classes cuckoo, but I know why.
Yeah.
And so, it's like what you say, once you practice that a lot and start to make it conscious, it suddenly becomes something that you just notice. and it becomes quite second nature. And so part of why that's helpful is then when I notice it, I'll either go back there or stay longer to get that shot because I know that's not going to happen often. And I know that's probably good enough, from just a simple, good portrait perspective.
And I'll add, Rich, that even if it's an encounter, if you know this concept and you have this in your mind and it's something you're actively consciously thinking about, even when you are given an opportunity with a brand new bird in a brand new spot, it can change your approach because you start to look like, all right, what background options do I have if I approach to the left or do I approach to the right? And you start making those decisions before you've even gotten into range to take that photo, right? And like that's a thing that I've noticed the most with students in the field when photographing birds in the forest and stuff like that is I watch them just do this natural and it makes sense, right? It's the shortest approach, like the most direct line, right? And it's like, okay, yeah, that logically makes sense because you want to get closer to this bird. It's too far away right now. But then I'm over here going like, well, I'm going over here around this way. It's a little bit longer, but I'm trying to position for this background that's way over there that I see that we're going to try and line up. And then I try to teach that and they're like, oh, okay, I didn't even notice that. Like they were so subject focused, they weren't even paying attention to the background at that point. And so all these things you just brought up, when they're in your mind, they can make these, like, this is how it applies in the field,
Massive difference to where you position yourself, how low you go, and then you can take this extra layers, right? It's like if there's framing of color in the background, that's also going to, elevate your portrait even further because you're creating even more of a focal point. And that's going to, again, change your approach. So I think it's bringing these things into consciousness for me that has been so helpful. It's like, okay, that's why that's better than the average. So, and now this is how I can go about achieving that in the field. And so I think the thing that I want to say at this point is that in the beginning, it's pretty painful and frustrating,
Yeah.
And so that people don't get discouraged. It's like, this has been quite a lot of pain and frustration for me to get to the point where this is actually fun and interesting, and it's a lot about because it's become habitual, because this is, I put it into my conscious, I practiced it. So now I just start seeing the things that I need to see. And I'm hoping this will do it for those that are listening. But yeah, for me, being conscious of color, how that background is going to bouquet, how the bird is going to match or contrast against that background are absolutely critical in terms of me spending time there. Like I'm not going to waste time if that's not in place, because then I can't get it to good. And that for me is like, my job's to get it to good. And then sometimes great happens, by accident or like, by, pure favor. But yeah, this is something that I will often look for just to elevate my portraits.
A quick question for you. With backgrounds, and this is, I think it's just sort of a personal preference. I know a lot of bird portrait photographers, especially when they are talking about like smaller songbirds and stuff like that, they love just like the absolute smoothest, just single color background versus, I'm going to go back here, one like this that has a little bit of texture to it. Do you have a preference there? Because I certainly do. I love the added texture and interest that comes with something that's not just plain. But I'm curious to hear your preference there.
Yeah. It's funny. Like I'm just curious by nature. So I really wanted to understand why people did like that, because there's a lot of guys, that especially guys that love setups.
Yeah.
Because then you can almost like artificially create what you want. So clearly they do it on purpose. And so I was really fascinated to go, well, why do you love that? And I think it's really your definition of success, Ray. So in art, you've got your definition could be imitationism. You want things to be as realistic as possible. Mm-hmm. It can be formalism. You want perfect form, perfect lines, perfect color, perfect everything. And that's a lot of like your great setup photographers. I don't know if it's conscious or subconscious, but that's their definition of success, this perfect form. And part of that is having a perfect all green background.
Yeah.
My problem with that is that's not my definition of success, is not formalism. Mine is more around storytelling and emotional, evoking emotion. And I also just go from the principles of art, right? So mine is like, I like variation, variety in my backgrounds. And art supports that, because art says if you don't have enough variety, it's boring. And that's probably like, I understand if your definition of success is that formalism, that's part of it, right? Yeah. But what that often lacks for me is variety and interest. And so, I definitely prefer backgrounds that are varied, that have some texture, have some interest. And that's also supported by just the principles of art, because I think what you do away with, let's take that to the nth degree, right? A blue sky background.
Yeah.
One, there's a lot of those, and most of them are found a little bit boring over time
Yep.
because there's no variety. And so I think, that's something that a formalist would probably need to consider, is having that absolutely pure background necessary in formalism, or can you have variation that creates more interest for those that really have a bias towards it? And again, like that is there's some subjectivity in that, but I would always push, I guess, a formalist to try and add more variety to their backgrounds, not from a personal taste perspective, more from an objective art perspective. So yeah, that's my personal preference is obviously variety,
Yeah.
but yeah, objectively, I think it's good to push other artists in that direction as well to consider it, because a lot of art loves variety. It creates interest, it draws you in, it's exciting, it creates different places to focus on. So yeah, it's a
Man,
long answer to your question, but I hope it was helpful.
no, I love talking to you, man. I was just gonna say I love hearing this stuff from you. Like, seriously, it gives me so much more to think about, and it's neat to hear sort of a little bit of reasoning and more understanding for myself as to why I'm biased that direction as well for that more variety. And everything you just said makes a lot of sense. So thanks for sharing that, man.
No, awesome. I think I'm just so insecure that I have to kind of like have objective, like structural, like reasoning for stuff that I love, And so I found such comfort in, it's not about me, it's about art and what that kind of like helps you with.
Yeah.
And I think if you're open-minded, it can be so helpful for those that just like plain backgrounds. Because yeah, you can still love plain backgrounds,
Sure.
but why not get a varied one? Because that's probably going to like appeal to more people, maybe, or a different, you know, area of people or group of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I love that. Like, I mean, that's part of just learning to be a better photographer.
Perfect. On to the next shot here. This vulture.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and I think like I don't think this is a great shot, but like I was always really like confused about what people meant by fill the frame, because it was like, hey, fill the frame the guideline, but like, what do you do with that,
Yeah.
Like, and only really when I started to study balance and specifically symmetrical balance did fill the frame start to make more sense to me. And I think if you just look at like moving from average to good, this is just an image that I think you've got colors. Another example where you've got the bird's colors match the
Yeah.
background. So you've got a nice, simple, plain background. It's not plain, sort of yellowy brown, but it's clean. But you've got the feathers on the bird that match that background, so that creates a degree of just harmony, togetherness. And then, like, it's just using basic composition and what I know about composition. So you've got this real symmetry left to right, which balances the image, which creates a pleasing image. And then you're looking for things that composition will say are helpful. So I think, you want a subject that has variety. And I love bearded vultures because it's got this triangle and
Yeah.
people are drawn to shapes. So you've got basic composition. It's just like I'm drawing you to its bill and its eyes through a triangle and lines that lead you there. So it's a subject that lends itself. And I think that's one of the things to take note of. When I'm doing portraits, I choose subjects that lend themselves to portraiture because it's such a competitive genre. Like there's just so
Yeah.
much out there. It's the most competitive genre. Competitions, I've judged them, the most entries go into portraits.
Yep.
And so to differentiate yourself is really difficult. So I often will choose birds that lend themselves to that differentiation. So I think here it's choice of subject in itself can help you move your image to good because you've got a bearded vulture with a triangle and these incredible lines that are very high contrast. And then you've got these wings that are black that help frame the bird.
Yep.
And then you've got these amazing patterns. So, it's just matching color to background and then some cool stuff based on the nature of the bird and its color, what colors it have that really create that interest and intrigue in what is otherwise just a bird looking at you with a plain background.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think in terms of my full the frame shots, which I don't have much of, this is probably one of my better ones because of those just basic use of composition.
Yeah, definitely. And, moving into, and I'm just going to bounce to these two really quick, moving into
Awesome.
fill the frame. I brought up these two examples because I think, let's start with this one. Just like your bearded vulture, it shows that you don't have to have the entire bird in the frame for it to work.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
can cut off parts of the bird consciously. I think that's an important part of it, right? Is like being very direct and understanding why you're chopping off certain parts of the bird. But then if we reach into this photo on the right, it's showing that like sometimes you can crop them in weird ways and have what I would call a more visually interesting photo. And so same thing here, right? Like a northern gannet is a bird with like incredible lines. I mean, they almost look cartoonish the way they're drawn on the face and the bill there. So they lend themselves to a close-up portrait to really be able to see those details and examine that and follow those lines. But then when we get into the photo on the right, it was pretty easy for me to take like all I had to do was lean back and I could have gotten the top of the head in there to complete that. But there was something that told me to like let's just get so in your face that it feels like I can't even fit the bird in there, and then also play with throwing it offset. Like he's, most of the times when I shoot things where the bird is looking directly at me, I would tend to center them up. But it was, for me, it was two reasons. The curves that were happening here, especially on the right, like sort of helped me flow a little bit to the space to the right. And then the second part of it, and this is something that I do often in my photography, and it's a conscious decision, which is I'm going to throw this composition off just to mess with the viewer a little bit, right? Just to get attention. But like, how do you do that in a pleasing way so it doesn't feel so off that it's off-putting? You know what I mean? And this is where I end up, and this is where I don't know how to explain anything beyond that other than like it just feels right in the moment,
Yeah, cool. I mean, from just like a very objective point of view, I love that the blue eyes match the blue background.
Yes.
I love that connection. And I love that the yellow of the bird is almost like really high contrast, yellow on the color wheel against blue.
Yep.
So that in itself is cool, and I think like, yeah, I mean, the biggest thing you've got to worry about with sort of unorthodox compositions is a balance, and if you can have an imbalanced image, if you do it on purpose to create impact, but people are going to kind of know that you've done that. And for me, because, I mean, balance is such a tricky one to go like, hey, 99.9% chance it's balanced. I don't know, I'm still learning. But because you've got quite a lot of visual weight. It's not perfectly symmetrical, this image. So I don't think a central composition would necessarily work, well.
Right.
And because you've got some visual elements on the left that need to be balanced on your right, you do need that neutral space to balance it. So I think from an objective principle perspective, I think this works. But I think the uncomfortableness is probably where you've cut the head off, so you kind of like, that's probably for me, it's like, and I think that's a risk, right? Because not everyone's going to like it.
Sure.
But that's okay, because I do think it works. I think it works for what you wanted it to do. It's just those unorthodox choices. And I don't even think it's like you've broken a rule. I don't think the rules are there to be broken. They're just really to be understood and used to tell your stories. But I think it's one of those where you're going to get a lot of people that go, not really my style.
Yep.
And you're going to get some that just go, I love it. Because I think you've got, at least from my humble opinion, most of the principles have been achieved. So cool. And I love what you say about the line of that bird that sort of moves you towards the bill and the eyes. Yeah, very cool.
And another thing, like this style of getting that close and everything, I sort of learned and adopted from my wedding and portrait photography. When I was doing that, which is going back 10 years now for when that was my full-time job. There was I wouldn't call it a trend, but it was a thing that was happening in like portrait wedding photography where you would get so close. And it, to me as a viewer, it always drew my attention because it created this intimate feel that you were so in your subject's face that it's like you can't help but be connected with
stare at those eyes.
Eye contact, right? And like if you're, for me as a wedding photographer, I'd have a couple that was like interacting, and it was sometimes like emotional, like close, almost kissing kind of thing, right? And then when you just like start chopping heads and get that in your face with it, like as a viewer, you're just like, it's like, wow, like I'm here. I can't look anywhere else, right? There's no escaping this. And for me on this photo, it also, I thought the cutting of the top added to the intensity. It added to that close feel of feeling almost like that bird could just like launch out and get you, which I will say in the moment of taking it, I was so damn close. It almost felt like that, you know?
Yeah, I mean, because it's one of those dangerous photos, right? Where you've chopped off the head and you've also like got the beak out of focus.
Yeah.
And so like for me, Ray, like I always just go back, well, what did you want to say? And if it's about me connecting with those eyes and staring into those eyes and like having an intimate moment with a gannet, then I think you've done your job,
Yeah.
And then it's just assessing it objectively against the principles of art. And I think the biggest question here would be one of balance. And for me, it doesn't look, I think you probably got that right.
Cool.
And then, awesome. Just a cool way to think about how to push a portrait.
Yeah. And then
and I love this one.
Another example.
I chose this one. Yeah, because it's again, very much like the bearded vulture. You've got this great contrast, and background's probably better because it's this really cool color.
Yeah.
And then you got the yellow against the green. You've got those beautiful eyes, and you just got crazy cool lines and textures here.
Yep.
And you're using, symmetry, which
Totally.
then, because it's centrally composed, I can pretty sure this one's balanced.
Yep.
Both left to right and top to bottom.
Yeah, definitely.
So cool. And I love that. Whether it's great, like I think it's good. It's just like how far is it? It's great.
Sure.
Like that's the kind of thing we're probably going to talk about when we move to like, okay, now that we've got some idea of just how to get our images to good and be confident with good, it's like that's going to be like the next topic of conversation. But I really like that. I think it just shows some really cool use of composition to get to that good, north of good place.
Yeah, and then I think this one of yours really brings us back into that color concept as well, right? I think that was a big part of what you wanted to talk about with this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, you got to perch a bird in the background, and I think the perch, it's a boring bird. It's a greyback cisticola. They're really hard to get that subject to shine. So this would not be my choice of subject if I was trying to win a portfolio competition.
Yeah.
But I thought it was a great way to go, well, how do you elevate, and get a good shot of a greyback cisticola? And so, you've got the cloud, like sort of light blue cloud background, which contrasts with the bird nicely and gets it a pop. You've got an interesting perch, which is, got cool textures and, helps obviously balance the image.
Yeah.
But then you've got, the bird with its wing panel, red wing panel or brownish red wing panel matching part of the background below. And it's really subtle differences, but that's the difference for me between moving from okay to good. I'm confident that this is good because I don't have spent a lot of time with cisticolas and don't have many shots where this has come together. So it's going like, it's quite hard to match your bird's wing panel with the background, also to get it to contrast and have a beautiful perch that complements it in this way. And there's a lot of harmonious colors going between the perch, the bird, and the bottom of the background. So just another, I guess, illustrative example of just using basic compositional things to improve a portrait.
Yeah, and also, pose an open beak, right? And so we're going to start segueing slowly into what starts elevating the photo beyond that good, and it's these tiny little things sometimes. Sometimes it's big and in your face, but other times it can be this tiny little thing. And my guess would be you probably shot a burst of photos of this bird in that same exact spot there and have it sitting there with its beak closed in basically the same position. It's like, but the open beak makes it more interesting.
It's a little bit of difference.
It is.
100%.
Yep.
Yeah. I love that point, Ray.
Yeah. And then,
I think
then you get a bird like this. That's like a little different.
Lends itself.
Yeah.
And again, just another illustrative example. And I think this one kind of moves into probably what we're going to talk about next, but you can also change the light. And so, we were talking about if you use backlighting or side lighting, is it still portrait? And absolutely, if it shows the character and personality of the bird. And Southern red bishops are made for portraiture. And they shine beautifully with side light or backlight.
Yeah.
And again, it's just using a varied background where you've got, the red against that almost dark blue, and then you've got the light at the bottom. It just creates interest. And just another example of that.
Yeah, and a thing that is, I just want to talk a little bit about like post-processing and proper exposure too here. Something that I see, what I would consider called, I would say it's a mistake often made, is black birds with black eyes and black features like that, when that detail isn't brought out properly. And I see it in two ways. Number one, it's just like if the contrast is hammered so hard and the shadows are so deep, you can barely even see the eye coming out of there. Like that gets lost. And so, we talked about like one of the first things about what's a solid portrait is eye contact. And if we can't see the eye, that's going to be a ding against it. But the second way I see is kind of an overcompensation in that, and I see it a lot lately, which is the overlifting of shadows and the weakening of contrast. And this, I think it's, and again, I think in the beginning it makes sense, right? You're just like, well, I have these tools where I can lift the shadows and recover all this detail out of my raw file, so why wouldn't I want to see it? But it goes so far and it weakens contrast and things look ghosted and lack color and richness to them. And I just encourage everybody to be mindful and conscious when you're editing, especially a photo like this, because it can be so easy to just lift those shadows and like, oh, here's all this feather detail. It's like, yeah, but was it that way when you were there looking at it? Like you said, Rich, the lighting was coming from behind. Like those black feathers aren't being illuminated right now. And so we probably shouldn't see the detail in them because then we're going to be so weak in contrast, we've lost the richness and color elsewhere.
Yeah, and that really is like, what's the story, right? Because if you're using backlighting and you want to see the feather detail on a black bird, you're using the wrong lights.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So clearly, like, either you didn't think about your story or what you wanted to say or what part of the personality and character you wanted to display. And yeah, I agree. I think that's a mistake, because it's a mistake in the field.
Yeah.
I think there's so much to cover in terms of what gets you to good. And we've probably like not gone with some of the obvious things, like just technical. You gave an example, but it was intentional to blur the beak of the bird. But obviously, just to get to good portrait, we're kind of like not talking about just technical good.
Yeah.
So in focus, things that shouldn't be out of focus.
Sure.
Because I always say to someone when it comes to portraits, like, would you like the whole bird in focus? And 99% of the time, the answer is yes, I would like the whole bird in focus. So if the light was too bad, or you had to go so low in your f-stop to blur the background because the background was close to the bird, that you did the best with the opportunity you had. But is that a good portrait because now the legs are blurred and so it's just being really honest with ourselves. And so I think there's quite a bit to talk about there in terms of mistakes that I see in post-processing, whether it's oversaturating, doing too much in the shadows, trying to use artificial intelligence to stop the massive amount of noise that was created because of bad lighting and whatever. So I guess we're not really going to massive detail, but I think like there's some sort of table stakes here around technical, outside of just eye contact. I think we've taken that for granted, and maybe that's an assumption we shouldn't have made. But there's definitely, some things to talk about just around technical soundness in a portrait before you can move it to good. And I guess also some obvious things like distracting stuff that we haven't really gone into a whole lot of detail. That I'm kind of just assuming most of us know, but maybe not for some people in the audience. I think there's some technical stuff that you really need to consider. There's some, other details that come towards then starting to think about eye contact and the other things we've been talking about.
Yeah, and I think that's okay. I mean, it would be an all-day event if we were to cover all of that, you know what I mean? So we're definitely coming in with an assumption of a certain level of understanding. And if some of that isn't making sense to anybody watching, there's plenty of great videos out there that you can search and find that can help you get to that point for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so that's great. I love that this was a fresh one that you just like threw in this morning.
Yeah, like it was literally a few minutes before I got caught in a massive thunderstorm. Like the rain had said it was coming like an hour or two later, and I just got absolutely drenched. And actually it was like crazy. It was lightning. But anyway, the highlight was just spending time with this purple heron. And it's funny, I just thought it was a cool example to just look how to elevate a portrait, because I know these birds well. They breed around my estate where I live, and they're pretty shy. So you don't get many portraits of them often, and they're beautiful, as you can see. They've got this incredible color scheme, and so I just thought it was worth showing because it kind of talks to using some compositional things that add to the image, that bring it to life, but don't distract from the fact that this is all about the personality in the bird. And so, just the bird's pose, I think, is quite interesting. I think those little plumes, you don't often get to see the little two plumes out the back. You've got great eye contact. I'm obviously very low in eye level, but just the compositional things that just pushed this a little bit more towards good or beyond that was just the colors, the matching colors and the harmony of colors in the image, the framing of that bird's head,
Yeah.
with the background, the framing that the trees provide to the bird's head. And yeah, and also the kind of the lines you've actually, it's a golf course in the background. So that curvy line is actually like a golf cart path, which is crazy, right? But it
Wow.
kind of subtly leads you to the bird. So I just looked at that, like, this is like, it's a portrait, right? Like
Yep.
it's a bird standing in front of me, but you've got very subtle things there that frame, that lead the eye, that take you and emphasize its plumes, its character. And so, yeah, I thought it was a good one of just showing how, yeah, I just asked myself, does that happen often? And it was like, no,
Yeah.
like for all that to come together, I was pretty confident that I got good and then had to run home because it started raining. But yeah, I thought it was a good example of just, what I'm thinking about in the field, and this is where I spent most of my time this morning because it was the obvious place where I could see I could just get what probably is my best portrait. I've got quite a cool flight shot of these guys, but
Okay.
probably at least one of my best portraits of a purple heron.
Nice, man. And I think this illustrates one of the things I was talking about when we first started, sort of the definition of a portrait of like this the size of the frame does not matter, Like this is arguably a little bit smaller in the frame. It's nice it's a larger bird, that helps, but you could have, potentially, if the bird allowed, gotten closer, or you could have cropped it closer in post just to make it without some of that additional, space around it. But in this case, it's still so all about that bird. All of that additional stuff, the out of focus trees, they're out of focus enough that they're not an element per se. They're something that helps bring us back, brings some framing, brings some structure
Yeah,
to the photo, right?
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
they lead you back to the bird, I think is key.
yeah,
And also I think like why I did that is those trees actually create amazing depth. You've
yes,
got foreground blue, you've got middle ground, and
yep,
then you've got like this almost linear perspective as that line goes out between those trees.
yeah,
And for me, that's creating three dimensions. Depth is a guideline in art, and artists spend a lot of time learning how to create depth. And it's helpful knowing that because then you can see where a situation is going to allow that to do that for your portraits or your habitat shots. But I thought it was quite rare to get a portrait, which I still feel is just so about the personality of the bird, but
yeah.
have that depth and that framing. That just doesn't happen often for me.
No.
So anyway, I just put it into the mix just to, give an example.
Well, and it's a perfect segue into this topic of when does a bird portrait no longer become a bird portrait? And so I have this example of a puffin I took not too long ago, and this was shot with a 10 millimeter lens, right? So, certainly trying to incorporate more stuff. But, I think right off the bat, a lot of people would see it and it's just like, yeah, this is still just like a nice shot of that bird. Your eye goes right to it. But, having these two photos side by side, I think most people would agree that the photo on the right of the puffin is all about the habitat, right? It's all about that scenery. Like it's in focus back there. Everything is like pointing to the puffin in every way possible. And there's, I worked hard to make that happen, but that wasn't my goal. My goal wasn't to just make this bird
Yeah.
shine. I wasn't trying to show the personality of this bird, and some of that may
Yeah.
come through because puffins are puffins. They have personality galore, right?
Yeah.
They exude it
Yeah.
like crazy.
Yeah.
But my goal with this photo was to show off that habitat and the clouds and the scenery and the drama of that entire location. And so, like this, I think it's great to see your smaller in frame shot still feeling like a portrait, still becoming a portrait. And while there are hints to habitat back there, they are
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
a main or secondary subject even. They are just there to help complement and bring you back to that main subject,
Yeah.
your portrait, and show the personality.
Yeah, and I think it's such a hard line to draw, and I think that's why we included these two shots.
Yeah.
Is I think there's like a gray area. In fact, like when
Of
I
course.
started photography, I had habitat shots that some would allude to the environment. They just weren't birds in the environment because they weren't what wildlife photography defined as birds in the environment or animals in the environment, where it was exactly like your puffin shot, small in frame, but with such context of where it
Yeah.
is. So many questions in your mind about like, the ocean. It's at the end of the day, the storytelling potential, but I still had a fairly small in frame bird in habitat, albeit just flowers and rocks
Yeah.
which gave you a sense of it's, in the mountains and it's wildflowers, but it wasn't a birds and environment and it wasn't a portrait. And so I do think, I still got a lot of images that sit in no man's land. I
Yeah.
can't enter them to either category because they just sit too, yeah,
Yep.
they're not obvious in either direction.
Yeah.
And I think these are, good examples where you pushed your puff and it's clearly birds and environment. There's probably this middle ground of sort of whatever you want to call it, in betweeners. And I think the purple heron probably pushes towards a pretty comfortable. If I put that in a competition, it wouldn't be kicked out for not being a portrait.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's quite hard to. Yeah, I think the best question is it's still all about the bird and the personality and the character of the bird. And if there's too many elements
Yep.
that are getting to start thinking about where it is, what it's doing, how lovely the scene is, you've probably gone too far and you're either in no man's land or you've entered birds and environment.
Yeah, and I just think like there's nothing on the right photo screams personality of the bird to me. It really doesn't. And like so much does out of the left one. And one thing I didn't, I sort of neglected to mention that I wanted to is like even the pose. I've never seen this species in person, but I've seen plenty of herons that are very similar. And that the legs coming out the way they are like that is just kind of an odd, there's almost like a little bit of a comedic feel to it, just from knowing, like seeing birds this much. It's just like, it's a silly stance almost, and it, to me, that like
and it's
draws me
very
in.
unusual.
It is, right?
Yeah.
Like normally there's like,
I've never seen a purple heron behave like this, Ray. Like they are normally so shy
yeah,
and it's standing out in the open,
he's
staring
bold.
at me for ages, and exactly, and allowing me to get closer. So this is not a typical purple heron, but I know this bird. I've seen him then before. He's different, and
Yeah.
I love that. He's got this. I've just captured something. He's not the normal. This is
Yeah.
not like what you'll normally see, but it is this particular purple heron, and you've got all that cockiness and
Yeah.
that like boldness and
Yep.
that like I want to stay here, and he did want to stay here because he flew back, once I left him. And like he just wanted to be there. And actually, what frightened him wasn't me. It was a guy on a bicycle that was going to work. So he flew off, and so I left because this time is over. But he came right back. So
Nice.
he's just different. Like he obviously has just got somewhat more
Yeah.
used to people. And I love how that shows in his pose,
Yep.
and just yeah.
Yeah.
I was really chuffed to get that.
No, that's awesome. These are 4 great photos. I'd love how you brought this up and put these together. And yeah, I'd love to hear what you're trying to illustrate with these.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, it's really what I do use to, yeah, it's kind of a bonus section I have in my mentorship program where I go like, sure, okay, we've talked a lot about how to just move your portrait to good, but it gets people to be creative with what they've got to work with, just some of the things I think about. So, the first picture, the bird top left, is just a standard portrait, which is kind of like what you'd get in a field guide. It's for me, my definition of success, it's just okay, it's average. It's just the bird on a stick, good eye contact, nice background, good contrast, but there's nothing, that's all I've got going. It's okay. And for me, yeah, it's close to good, but I'd like to do something else that gives me more confidence. So what are the things that we can play with? And so, the one in the next one on the top right, you can play with the perch, and you can play with the background, and you can play with the lighting.
Yeah.
So those are things, if you're looking at your portrait, well, how do I just start to differentiate? Because now we want to start talking about, okay, we've got some considerations about what makes a good portrait, but how do you start building your confidence so that you move your portrait either to good or north of good? And so like, I think about, hey, like, what's a beautiful perch? And so I know that curved
Yeah.
lines are more beautiful and calming than straight horizontal ones, for example. And diagonal curved lines are more powerful than straight horizontal ones. So the type of perch can elevate your image. Then you look at the background and you go, well, sure, like that's quite hard to get together because you've got 3 different colors,
Yeah.
but they're all of the same tonal value. And so why that's important is it doesn't create a distraction. It actually creates togetherness and it creates simplicity because the tonal value is the same. So if you grayscale that image, it's
Yeah.
gray, all same tone. And so artists use that to create harmony in their work. So you can start think about how do you use your background to elevate your portrait. Then you can think about lighting. Could I use backlighting or some other form of lighting just to show a little bit different, it can create a more haunting feel or a different part of that bird's personality, as you saw with that southern red bishop. And then it's like, and I guess this is where portrait again is like, where does a portrait shift into behavior? I've definitely won awards for portraits that could have gone into either.
Yeah.
And so I do think a portrait like this bird doing the splits, think about unique, different behavior that's going
Yeah.
to grab people's attention within your portrait. And then sometimes two is better than one.
Yep.
So if you want to start seeing interaction or intimacy or unusual things happen, often two birds can do that, sometimes a lot more than one. And the way I like to bring this all together in terms of just helping people think about how to elevate their portraits in the field is, imagine you got that top right bee eater with the backlighting, with the three colored background, with the beautiful curved perch. And then you had two birds positioned doing Pilates on that branch. We might have great,
Yeah.
And that's the kind of way, I just get quite childlike with pushing my portraits, is going like, how do I put myself in a situation where great can possibly come from good? And these would be some of the questions that, I encourage myself to ask in the field, but also others, and it's really just looking at the three key things. You've got a bird, you've got a perch, and you've got a background, and sometimes you have a foreground, and those are just good things. How do you use those just to elevate your portrait a little bit more and make it different to the thousands of other portraits that are out there?
I want to bring up one other thing. When I look at all these photos, three of them sort of exhibit a characteristic that I think works really well, and the one does not. And I'm curious if it matters to you that much. And that's sort of I'll call it the weight of the perch, right? The size of the perch compared to the subject. Is that something that
100%.
matters to you a lot,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, it's just like that big, thick, chunky perch with a smaller bird. And again, right, none of these things are ever 100% of the time, right? There are times where like a big, chunky, huge perch does work with a small bird. So it's not to say it never does, but more often than not, if we were just to compare all of these, like the perch on all three of these fits that bird. This one, it feels too much in a way.
Yeah, I love that, Ryan. I mean, again, it gets in, there's just so much to talk on this topic, but I think that's what I learned from almost like the formalists, the setup kings,
Yeah.
I mean, I've told like a guy like Alan Murphy, I
Yep.
just learned so much from, and I've told him as much as like, I just got intrigued by how awesome his flight shots and portraits were. And so I started to get curious and work out like how he did it. I just learned so much, but from him, I just learned the power of perches,
Yeah.
and like, he would go and find perches, the perfect perch. So what is the perfect perch? And, undoubtedly small bird, small perch, but also like curve,
Yeah.
diagonal, interest of the perch. Is there moss? Is there stuff that pushes that perch to
Yeah.
become even more beautiful than another perch you could use? And I always encourage people to go and do setups in their garden, because often they don't have as much time as maybe you or myself do to get out into the field.
Sure.
And I find like you want to be practicing your technical side, and setups in your garden do that in spades, man.
Yeah.
You can choose the background, you learn about bouquet, you learn about your f-stop, you learn about how close you need to be to get the bouquet,
Yep.
and you start to actually pick the perches. And when you're picking your perches, you start telling your brain what perches look beautiful and what don't. And it's amazing how that starts to translate then into what you start looking for in the
Yeah.
field. Because once you know what a beautiful perch is, you start noticing them. And often you go, hey, I wonder if a bird's going to land on that beautiful perch. And then you go, if I go back tomorrow, because that's an amazing perch and that
Yeah.
background's amazing, I'm going to go and spend time there
Yep.
just in case something does land there.
Yep.
And that's like what I say is, once you start just understanding these things and the incremental things that add up, you then start spending your time in the right places.
Yeah.
And I think that's what gives you a greater consistency in your results.
Yep.
As you just don't waste time in the wrong places with a big fat perch and a tiny bird. I don't think that works often at all, unless the perch is part of the framing and there's texture on the perch, or
Correct.
there's something that really
Yeah.
does something different. So there's exceptions, but
Yeah.
most of the time it's not going to work because it just completely,
It's too dominant.
takes center stage. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that point.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so moving on, we got a few great examples coming up here of what we would consider good and better and heading towards great. So we'll start with these.
Yeah, and I don't think either of these are great, but it's just like an illustrative example is like really like, how do I try and push and better my portraits? And so, you've got the bird on the left, and actually it's quite a rare moon. It's a lesser moon, which you don't get to photograph often. And so, Yeah, I love that it's a new presentation technique. It's using high key. So that's an area of differentiation. I
Yeah.
love the curve in the bird and the simplicity of the image.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, and maybe it's good, but like I'm going like, how do I get my portrait to stand out and get more people to notice it and engage with it? And so I look at the bird on the right and I'm always looking for unique points of interest, things that are difficult to repeat or to happen again.
Yes.
And so in this particular thing, what I mean by unique points of interest is you've got this triangle in its wing, and triangles that are not right way up create a sense of dynamism, tension, and a sense of movement, right? So you've got that point of interest. Then you've got a leg lifted, which is again a sense of movement. And then you've got a sense of movement in the water. So you've got three like things that give a sense of movement. And for me, movement is a principle in art. So I'm going like, that doesn't happen often. And I've used a high key background and there's some nice curves.
Yeah.
And so like, that's the way it's like, I don't know where any of these land up, but I'm pretty confident that this one's just further north of the previous one. And so I really encourage people not to get so caught up in, am I going to win an award or is it great? Because I don't think we get to decide that. And there's some subjectivity in that. Rather just get excited about how to think and push your own images to get them just a little bit better, to elevate them. And hopefully that's a good just example that illustrates that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with it. I certainly think it does. And then, we're coming back to talking about having pairs of birds, and you got a couple of examples here of having more than one bird in there, and yet still, like, absolutely, this is a bird portrait, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, and we don't think this happens often,
The symmetry of this is incredible, dude.
Yeah, and make it a little heart shape, and
Yeah.
they are in love,
Yeah.
So again, it's just, yeah, I'm pretty sure, like, I don't think anyone would call me arrogant to go, yeah, I think as a portrait goes, this is a little bit north of good. And
Yeah.
I think you can see why. Like, there's just a lot of, yeah, it's simple composition. You've got beautiful symmetry, but you've got these beautiful
Curves.
arabesque shapes,
Yeah.
which people love and creates a togetherness and harmony and unity. You've got a pleasing background. It's a background that complements the birds, has a degree of texture in it. And yeah, you've got a head position that, yeah, like, it just doesn't happen often when they
Yeah.
do that in front of you.
I mean,
And
how
yeah,
happy
the
were
story
you when this
behind
was happening in the moment? You must have
no,
been
but
like,
I almost passed out with excitement
Yeah,
because I know
dude.
these birds. I wrote a newsletter on it because I've known these birds for years. They always come back and show me their new chicks. I think it's because they were probably born on our estate.
Mm.
And I don't know why, but every year they just come show the new two chicks off, And what was crazy is like they were showing me their chicks, and I mean I know they're not showing me, but they're coming back to show their little babies where they grew up or where to get food from or whatever their
Yeah.
purpose is. I don't know. And like suddenly another two birds flew in and landed and started to have a fight with the adult pair. And like it was just the most crazy moment. And then I think they realized that they knew each other. I think it was chicks from
Mm.
previous generation is the only thing I can think of, because then they just started dancing with one another and
Wow.
they just started walking towards me and then started, yeah, like frolicking and loving on one another. Like I was lying on the ground because they were quite far away when I started. And then they just kept getting closer. It was just, yeah, it was just the most awesome scene. And yeah,
Wow.
this is a meme. And it's
Yeah.
quite a big crop. I mean, just because these birds, their comfort distance is like a country mile.
Yeah.
So it's a bigger crop than what I would like, to get this. But yeah, I think it was worth doing for just, it's still got such good image quality. So yeah,
And I
it's worth
think
doing.
there's something else too, especially like if I had like one word to describe of this photo as like as a descriptor, it would be curves. Like there's just so many beautiful curves happening in this, and it's like to the point of where and when you get to see this on a larger screen, and this is the beauty of like not viewing everything on Instagram, right? Is I get to see even the feathers here, the shorter ones on the neck are still curving this way, and then these all start having their own curves, and then you get down here, and like these shapes are just these these
Yeah.
wonderful curves within the shape of the bird, not just the outline of the shape of the bird, and it's just like, man, there's just so many beautiful curves and lines happening in this
Yeah.
that
No,
are
exactly right.
well, and they're also subtle enough to not like scream for attention and yank me away from this beautiful interaction of them up here. They're things that I only get to enjoy after spending time with the photo and really enjoying it. And like therein lie an elevated portrait, right? Like there's more time to more things to discover the longer I spend with it.
Yeah, and I think it emphasizes what I said about like choosing your subjects wisely when you're
Yeah,
trying to produce a great portrait, because there's no doubt that gray crowned cranes are very popular portraits. And because of all the things you say, they've got this beautiful textures, these beautiful lines, these beautiful patterns, these beautiful colors. And so, the trick is then to get it all to come together,
sure.
and create a heart shape. And, but they lend themselves. They've got so much already there that lends itself to art, that, they're a great starting point. And you just need like a small area of differentiation, a small little bit of uniqueness. And I think that's probably like what I look for, once I'm comfortable, and we've shared quite a lot about what gets to a good portrait. Once I'm comfortable, it's good. For me, what I'm looking for is these little areas of uniqueness, unique points of interest, unique use of composition that I haven't seen before with this specific subject,
Yep.
And things that I go, sure, even if I'm not sure it's unique, man, that's very unlikely that that's happened in that way
Yes.
before. And yeah, I think that's like an important point to make. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, is when I'm looking at portraits, and really, sometimes I do go out purposely to create portraits. I'm looking for, a subject that lends itself, and really trying to push it towards that unique differentiation. And I think the biggest thing for me is I have to do a lot of research. I either have to know that bird better than just about everyone, because then I know when I've got something that's unique, or I need to have researched it really well.
Yeah.
So if I look at, we're going to have a picture coming up of, you've got a common loon, I've got a European roller. I really researched to find out like what has been taken of those birds before.
Yeah.
So I've got a really good sense of what's been done before, because that's really like, that's what you're up against in terms of like relative to. And once you've seen so many images of the same bird, it helps you recognize where you've captured that little bit of differentiation or uniqueness. Because I think with portraits, because of the such high level of competition, it is these small, subtle sometimes, but actually huge, because they are unique and they just elevate and push it just a little step further.
So let's keep going with those unique things. That's what we're going to keep. We got a bunch of examples that we'll kind of keep talking about, those unique things that help to differentiate. The head, the feathers on the head of these guys is the best.
Crazy, man. They're like punk rockets. Yeah. I mean, it's a great subject, right? And like funny, this is like, I spent 3 weeks in Northern Kruger, and these must be the most confiding crested guinea fowl in the world. They're in camp, so they don't really mind people that much. So they'll often just walk straight by you. And I think like once you start realizing, and for me, I said in the beginning, we're probably not going to have time in this particular show, but I really researched to work out like what techniques make great images. Because I think there are like just techniques that I see used again and again that do that. They just create that uniqueness or that differentiation that pushes you into a different orbit. And it was interesting with these guys, because I knew they were confiding, because I knew they weren't really bothered by people, and because I also knew their behavior. I knew they were heading to, there's sort of watering areas, or areas where they'll get water within the Kruger. And as a result, I positioned myself accordingly on that route towards that watering station. And so, that in itself puts you in a position for something different to happen. And what happens at the end of the day is guinea fowls preen and they dust themselves off. And so although I didn't know this was going to happen, I knew that kind of what might happen. And I think this is a technique I call the unexpected.
Yeah.
And normally it's when you personify a bird, or you catch a bird doing something that no one's seen it doing before. They didn't realize it did that. It's a surprise.
Yeah.
And everyone goes, well, how do you intentionally go about capturing a surprise? Well, you put yourself in a position where it's most likely to happen, when a bird's preening, when it's being intimate, when it's doing different stuff. And so, I think for me, it is like, I kind of knew when I took this, I had something that was north of good, and I left it to, I guess, the world to decide whether it was great. But I knew I'd captured facial expression of a
Yeah.
bird. Like I've never seen a happier guinea fowl in my entire life. And yeah, and there's obviously good compositional things that, the back bird looking at the front bird and
Yes.
pointing you to the front bird, the cool curves and the togetherness and, the symmetry in the image. There's a lot to talk about there, and the big red eye that kind of like you can't
Yeah.
stop looking at. But I think in essence, like for me, if we look at, let's take it for granted that compositionally it's sound, technically it's sound, because it's pretty much a full frame image. The thing that then, because I think all great images kind of need those table stakes in place, the thing that pushes it is this unexpected,
Yeah.
this personification of this particular bird.
Yeah. Kind of feeding off of that, another unexpected thing to do is find a completely different perspective. So this bird, this exact individual, red-throated loon, has been photographed by probably hundreds of photographers at this point, right? It's a very well-known bird in a spot in Alaska that a lot of people go to, and he's a unique bird, just like you've talked about, Rich. This bird is like, something's up with his personality that anytime you walk up to the shoreline near him, he just swims to you, like swims over,
Oh, wow.
like right to you, and you actually have to watch out. If you're down laying low and trying to shoot like a standard water level portrait, he'll come over and like strike at you, like, so you have to actually be careful.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really bizarre. And he doesn't have a partner. He doesn't nest there. It's like nobody has figured out why this bird behaves this way, but it lends itself
Crazy.
to, you can get close, right? Abnormally closer than you can with with any other red-throated loon I've ever encountered in my life. And so what happens when you get close? Well, we start getting a bunch of close portraits, and all right, well, everybody that comes there gets that because the bird swims at you, so you start to see a lot of this sameness that comes out of there. And so, my next move was, all right, well, let's try some wide angle stuff. Well, the habitat doesn't really lend itself. It's not that beautiful for us to show off scenery there, so that's kind of falling flat. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, we're standing up on a dock here and realizing the bird's swimming right under me. What happens? Like, look at the patterns from above and starting to notice that. And that's what I did here. And it was, more challenging than it seems to get proper focus because he's swinging his head all over the place as he swims in like that. And then to get the symmetry was a little bit of luck involved because I was just firing off frames as he was swinging his head under, hoping they'd be in focus and hoping that I'd get a good lineup.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
No, I think this is a great portrait. And for me, the technique you've used is a unique perspective.
Yeah.
And it has to be unique.
Yep.
Because if someone had taken the shot previously, it wouldn't have that, like,
Not at all.
yeah, it just one of those shots where, yeah, I've never seen a loon like this, and it is just such a unique angle, and as a result, you get to see those beautiful patterns.
Yeah.
And I think the compositionally, it's also quite unique. There's not too many portraits where you have a central composition that works, right? And
Yeah.
I think, so too, you've got a unique perspective, but you've also captured quite a unique composition in terms of it's centrally composed, but it's perfectly symmetrical.
Yeah.
And I also just love, again, like you can see how you've got good in spades. You've got the bird matching the background. You've got the two red eyes that just contrast and capture your attention. You've got good use of composition, beautiful symmetry, and then like what pushes it for me. And yeah, I pulled this out. I went onto your website to find awesome portraits, and this one just stood out for me. I just thought that's just, yeah, in my like again, humble opinion, I just think that's a great portrait for all those reasons.
Oh, thanks, man. And so another thing that comes up with a lot of photographers is like, well, what can I do to go out and get these unique portraits, right? And one of the things that comes to my mind all the time is go out in the bad weather, go out in the unique weather, right?
Yeah.
It's not fun to be out there. Trust me. Like it's not fun to shoot. You got to protect the gear and everything's wet, but what it
I had
does.
an example of that today, man.
Yeah,
It was
exactly.
not fun.
Yeah, it's not fun. But when, in my experience, when I've made that decision, like I'm going out in the weather and you dress yourself and you dress the gear and you get out there and you realize it's not that bad. I can handle this, right? It's a little bit of extra effort, but I'm surviving it. It's fine. And then all of a sudden you realize like, here's this added element that most, not all, but most photographers would pass on. Because most photographers are like, I'm not going to deal with going out in that. It's too uncomfortable and difficult to deal with and everything. And now you've added that unique element, right? So you have that unique
Exactly
element.
right.
right? And this
Mm.
is a great example here, right? There's a common loon on the
Yeah,
left,
I agree.
just a fine portrait of it. It's nice soft light. It's pleasing. It's in focus. Clean background. There we go. We got all that stuff. But boy, does this shot impact you way more, right? And this was another
100%.
example
Mm.
of getting extremely close. And so this was one of those times where I knew I could see this bird sitting there in this light rain and just the water beating up on it. And I actually had a client with me this day, and I was really grateful that that client was open-minded enough for me to like kind of compel them to go out. It's like I told them, I'm like, we're going to be sitting in a boat of water, we're going to be sitting in puddles, like it's not going to be fun, but there's a chance we can get something really unique out there. And so we did. I paddled him out, and we came upon this bird. And once we did,
Okay.
it was relaxed. And it's like, let's take our time, let's drift in, and let's get as close as possible so we can show off that detail. And that's what the intention
Love
was
it.
here. You know?
Yeah, and it's amazing how subtle that is, just raindrops on your bird's head
Yeah.
and, like how those small things just, there's so many loon photographs out there.
Yeah.
And so that subtle difference though just creates interest and intrigue and like, yeah,
Yep.
it tells a deeper story about the bird. Yeah, I
And
love that. And I think this next shot even illustrates that even better. Like I think I love what you say because often weather yeah, sometimes gets birds to look super unhappy and
yeah,
grumpy and shows a different part of their personality,
there you
so
go.
it can add interesting elements, but it can also just make them real and personable,
Yeah.
because it's like how I would look if you stuck me on a branch in the
Yeah.
rain for that long. It's like a little
Totally.
grumpy and, I wouldn't mind a hot cup of coffee if you don't
Exactly.
mind, right?
Right. I
And
think
yeah, I love that. And
it
yeah,
exaggerates a personality, doesn't it? Like
yeah.
that's what I think this weather can do. You know what I mean? Yeah. Um,
Yeah, totally. I really love that. And yeah, it's again, it's like I think weather differentiates because not
yeah.
many people go out there. It was like when we had snow here. I took portraits of birds, but because there was snow and because were looking different and behaving
Yeah.
differently, they were unique. They like
Yeah.
just pushed that portrait to something different that people had never seen before. And it can be so subtle.
Yep.
One of the things that just reminds me of is like if you've got a bird and you always see it with a certain background, like we've got widow birds, you always see them with like blue sky backgrounds, grassland backgrounds.
Yep.
And then I found this unique environment by my home where there was forest, dark Afro-montane forest, and you hardly ever get the sort of grasslands that they breed on next to that kind of background.
Ooh.
And that just subtle change showed off things about those birds that I'd never seen before.
Yeah.
And they're subtle, they're tiny differences. And I don't think that any of the images are great. They're just some of my favorites because they show a different part of that bird's features or character or personality. And so, yeah, very cool.
Yeah, and I know we keep mentioning the word different and unique, right? And I want to kind of just like throw this out there for a lot of people to think of. Different doesn't always mean you get to ignore all the other stuff, right? Like it needs to be still different and follow all the other good, concepts and that you got to still have that baseline there. But that's the thing that the different can do, right? You can do the exact same thing and have the exact same baseline of, this size framing with a sharp bird and a clean background. But then if you get to add that different element in there, whether that be light, texture, rain, weather elements, behavior, any of these things, you've now elevated it. So you, as a photographer, didn't have to technically do anything different. You get to keep that same baseline, but now we've added that unique in there. And that's when it makes a
Yeah.
difference. But if you
Yeah.
ignore all that other stuff and let the unique outweigh that baseline, there can be different that's not good. It's not always better because it's different, but if it's different with the same baseline, like I just want to make sure
Yeah.
that people are at least consciously aware of that and thinking of that too.
Yeah. I loved what yeah, just a wonderful participant that I worked with said. He said like my job is I think I get it, Rich. He says, I think I get it. My job is to get good and then God will create great, and he shares
Yeah.
the same faith with me. It was just one of those moments where I'm like, yeah, like that just so resonates with me. And I think like what I realize is, yeah, we need to be able to get it good
Yeah.
and also recognize those opportunities that make great, that come our way. And I think hopefully that's what we're doing tonight is just to recognize,
Yes.
and some of them, I think people like want to be, creativity can just be with front lighting,
Yeah.
a creative guinea fowl with just a background that you've never seen it against
Yeah.
before And the fact that it is a red eye that suddenly just pops against that different background, because most of the backgrounds are like beige backgrounds. And, these guinea fowls were in a very more tropical, a lot more rainy area. And then it had this texture and this, like just tropical feel to it that I'd never seen. And it's because I know crested guinea fowls and I know the photos that have been taken about them. So, it's like I got to good, but I recognized an
Yes.
opportunity that great might happen. And then I was confident enough to go, okay, I think it happened, and it's so small, like it's just a, you know, good detailed shot of a crested guinea fowl with a red eye. I mean, the fact that it's a wonderful subject and looks like a punt rocker,
Yeah.
but that green brings out the perm in its hair and the textures in its hair, and it brings out that eye. And so, like that subtle difference just elevated it, and it ended up being a front cover of a magazine, and that was like a huge delight. But like, you needed the confidence to kind of know that, to
Yeah.
put yourself out there and to recognize that opportunity. So, yeah, I hope that's just super helpful for those listening. And this was just recognizing that this background just had that variety, texture, and color that I just never seen before with this particular bird.
And the texture is just so nice. And this is a perfect example of a subtle texture. And then I love that the next photo we have from you is a perfect example of like in your face texture that you cannot ignore, right? But this also absolutely elevates this portrait and takes it up a notch compared to like if we were imagine even that same color, even if we were have that same color and just that solid color back there, like it's not going to do the same. Like this is a fireworks explosion of like texture and color back there. I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah, and I think maybe just to give, so it does have a paintly feel, so
Yes.
you've got obviously it's a giant kingfisher with its breast matching the background, which connects it to the background, and then you've also got the black and white that,
Yep.
the white specifically creating that contrast. But what I actually did is I shot through a lot of foreground.
Yeah.
And so it's the foreground that has created this texturally feel, and the red is created by the background.
Yep.
And so, when you're looking to think about how to elevate your shots, you do start going through, what I have to work with here, foreground, background, perch, bird, and you start getting creative to give that level of uniqueness. Because I've never seen, this is probably what right up there with one of my favorite shots from the last couple of months. Just because one, to get a giant kingfish against these kind of colors where we don't really have the same kind of autumn
Yeah.
vibe that you Connecticut and places like that is quite rare. And then to get that paintly effect, I've just never really seen before, in any, in many photographs. So, to have that coming together, I kind of knew that this was a special perch. And funny enough, like this kind of says, this wasn't the first time I saw the perch. I actually saw it with a darter and then a heron. But because I knew the perch and I knew that I've got shots of a darter, exactly the same with that paintly effect, because I knew that
Yeah.
foreground and that background would do this. When this giant kingfisher landed there, I was on the opposite side of the dam. I had about like 400 meters to walk. And and the obviously the just thank you, Lord, that it stayed,
Yeah.
because I realized it was exactly on the perch
Yep.
and exactly what was going to happen. And I knew to get myself over there as, subtly as possible to
And you're
get the
going
shot.
stay,
'Cause
stay, 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 stay the whole
yeah.
time.
And again, it's like knowing what to look for,
Yeah.
recognizing it, and then being in that place, because I was in that place on purpose because I knew that perch was going to do this.
Yeah.
And it only happens for a short period of time because this tree's, moving from color. So going from green to now, it's not the same
Yep.
already. Just in a week or two, the color's gone, the impact is gone. Inside a very little short period of window of time to get the shot. But when this kingfisher landed there, I was like, this is, yeah, I was so excited. But yeah, and I think like again, like subtle differences, right? Just a bit of texture, red against red, do just create something that I think is a little bit different from the norm.
And technique using the foreground like that is a technique I use so often. Like I find myself in the field
Mm.
so often, Rich, where I'm like, oh, a bird just landed there. It's a great perch. Everything lights great. First shot or two I take clear, and then I immediately I'm like, oh, there's a bush. and I run right into it to just throw something in between me and that subject and see if I can do something with it. And it doesn't always pan out. Sometimes the distances aren't right or anything, but like, boy, if I don't explore that every chance I get, if there's anything around I can put between me and the subject. And like, what a stark difference compared to how I used to approach bird photography 10 years ago. Like it would never even cross my mind. And now it's almost an immediate reaction after I've gotten just like that one basic shot, because I'm looking to
Yeah, and I
elevate.
love that, right? Yeah. I think it's just, yeah, it's such good advice because I was exactly the same. You just wanted good and you didn't really think about how to elevate
Yeah.
because I honestly didn't know how.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you mean? It's a perch, it's a beautiful background. Like,
Yeah.
I've never had this happen to me before. And I think you get so caught up in like, I just love birds. So that one itself was gold.
Yeah.
And now I just want to elevate it to just show that subject off even more. And so
Yeah.
why take 1,000 shots of the same scene when,
Yep.
mirrorless cameras these days, it's sharp because it's got eye, tracking and it's going to be sharp. So
Yeah.
that's what I think mirrorless has done for me as well. I don't have to worry about getting that sharp shot. I know
Totally.
once I've got it and it's looking at me, I got it.
Yeah.
Now I want to elevate. And I think, just having things to think about and tools to use to create that elevation, it has been such helpful for me in the field. And foreground like you, do think about it a lot.
Yeah. And we have the last two examples here of ways to elevate it, man. So, yeah, let's hear about these
Yeah, and
shots and what your thinking was with
this
them.
Yeah, just very simple, I guess. I mean, I've obviously used high key in both, not really purposefully in terms of trying to illustrate that, but just worked for these two images. And I think, when apart from the other stuff we've discussed, when I'm doing portraits, I've obviously researched. I'll talk about the European roller first. Yes, there's lots of pictures of those birds with grasshoppers, often with green backgrounds. Um, and yeah, there are shots of them with centipedes, but I'd never really seen such a big centipede. And, then it was a cloudy day and I knew I could get pretty close. So actually, like if you see the raw original, like I've cropped the tail off because I could see there wasn't, this was the shot that I
Yeah.
wanted. And so I increased my exposure to get the high key in camera. And what intrigued me in the beginning was just this huge prey item, and I hadn't seen many images where you had this huge prey item and a high key background. So I knew there was good,
Yep.
but what pushed me to go, sure, this is an image I definitely want to enter into a competition is just the composition. When I worked out that we've got a beautiful implied triangle, which like the Mona Lisa creates stability and calm, I was like, that's crazy because that's the opposite of what's happening here.
Yeah.
You've got this chaotic scene of this poor guy trying to escape. And I thought, like, that's not going to happen often when you get high key, a massive prey item, and an implied triangle as part of your composition. And so it was those things that just I felt were enough to push it towards better.
Yeah.
And then if you go to the ground hornbill, again, it's just I haven't seen a ground hornbill often carrying like it's food delivery, right? It's like fast food, but it's got lettuce and it's got some meat, right? And it is quite a haunting, yeah, I mean, not a comfortable image because it's this cute little mouse and it's not cool because it's going to go and get fed to its chicks. But it is part of life and it's quite a
Yep.
more haunting image. But it's interesting, right? And it captures your attention. And I just love the curves in this.
Yeah.
So you've got this beautiful S-bend arabesque that leads you to, I guess, what is that unique point of interest? Because there's lots of these hornbills with puff adders and scorpions and different
Mm.
things. But I felt like almost the petiteness and the gentleness of this poor little mouse kind of adds to the impact and the
Sure.
emotional impact of this image. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, the unique point of interest is, yeah, I guess high key, beautiful curves, but just that combination of food item.
Yeah. No, it's wonderful, man. It really does. It's an impactful image, and hopefully we've given you all a lot of things to think about, both in the field and just like what you talk about all the time, Rich, is just having the confidence and having these ideas in your head. And I know, especially for beginner, intermediate photographers that might be watching this, it can seem like so outrageous to even think about any of these things when it's like, all I want is just like, let me get the bird close and in focus, right? But like, trust us, every one of us has gone through that, and the more you do this and the more you have these concepts and ideas in your head, the more you can, and you've mentioned this a bunch of times, Rich, turn them into habit. And then they become, at a certain point, some of these decisions become second nature. You almost don't even realize you're doing them. And I don't realize that I'm doing them often until I actually teach and have to articulate what I'm doing to somebody. And I realize I'm like, oh, I'm doing this and this and this and this and this and all these decisions, because they've become so habitual that they're just second nature and they just happen. And, it's not a fast transition. Be patient with yourself and have time. But over time, you can look back and say, wow, look at the difference of what I'm doing with my approach to this now, with all these thoughts in my mind. And at least for me, my hope is that by us sharing all of this with you, is it gives you a little bit of a shortcut to get there sooner.
Yeah, I love that, Ray. And I think that's a great way to wrap up. I think, like, for me, I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah.
And once I now knew what I had to focus on, I then could go through the painful process of making it a habit.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be, yeah, painful and frustrating for anyone. I just never really found it that painful and frustrating because I just love birds and being out there in nature. And,
Yeah.
and I think, that's for me is like, don't put that pressure on yourself to have to produce great. Just these things are, at least for Ray and I, super helpful, just tools and knowledge that, yeah, we wanted to put into practice and have gone through the process of, allowing them to become second nature, because we wanted to show off birds as best as possible, whether it's portraits or habitat shots. And so, yeah, I really hope everyone's enjoyed it. And Ray, I absolutely love our time together. So
Same
thank
here.
you. Yeah, just for you being you and for just another awesome session. And I hope everyone enjoys it. But yeah, have a lovely rest of the day.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you on the next one.